Hi everyone, Matt Gallagher here. I'm a writer and novelist and proud contributor to The Wrath-Bearing Tree. I'll be reading a bit today from my new novel, Empire City, which was excerpted in the April 2020 issue of The Wrath-Bearing Tree. It's set in an alternate America, and I'll be reading a bit from Chapter 5, which explores the streets and rhythms of that alternate America. Mia woke before the alarm. She usually did on weekdays. She was a person of routine, and that's what routine did. Sleep whispered like a lullaby through the black morning, but she pushed it away, sitting up in bed to put her mind in order. If she'd been dreaming, she'd already forgotten what about. Morning, she thought. Cardio. A storm had rolled through the city late in the night, leaving the brittle musk of rain. A coldness nipped at the top of Mia's shoulder. How do they keep getting in here, she wondered, rubbing at the mosquito bite. I shut the screen last night. Jesse hadn't come home. He'd sent a few texts, first saying he wasn't sure when he'd be leaving work, then saying he wouldn't be. All-nighters during bureau emergencies weren't unprecedented. Mia knew the deal. All part of marrying a special agent. Even if waking up by herself in darkness brought on a loneliness she didn't trust. Mia ate a yogurt, then changed into light workout gear and fitted her running leg and sneakers. Downstairs, the summer air smelled of metal and moss. Dim streetlights lined the corners like sentries, and the sidewalks had almost dried. A garbage truck on an adjacent block groaned through the still, while monitor drones pulsed red in the sky. She stretched her left leg, and then her core, and in front of her building, looking up to watch the flag whip around the top of the great global trade. 60 stars and 13 stripes, pale against the dark. All those rings and stars in the blue canton struck her as cluttered, still. Mia finished stretching and tapped at her right knee. Her running prosthetic was hard and coiled like a spring. She appreciated the city most during these early morning runs because it was empty enough to seem welcoming, even hopeful. It reminded her of the city from her childhood. It reminded her of the America she'd grown up in. Daybreak always ended the spell. Cut the crap, Mia thought. These 10 miles aren't going to run themselves. Then she took a deep breath, set the digital green of her wristwatch to 0, hit start, and began, the joints of her leg cracking with the motion, while the socket of her prosthetic did the same. She headed west, toward the harbor. Mia had run most of her life, discovering as a girl that she was good at it, and being good meant respect, and trophies, and approval. It made an object of her body, but it was a functional object, something that mattered to her even before she'd figured out why. She'd pushed herself to be very good at points in her life, competing in college for 2 seasons before it interfered with ROTC, and later running the city marathon her first year with a prosthetic to prove that she could. But she'd never crossed into greatness, and for that, she'd come to be thankful. Mia lacked the masochism of true runners, the renegade fanatical gene to ignore all the warning blinkers thousands of years of evolution had instilled in the human brain. Bloody calluses and angry muscles were one thing. Tendons ripping from bone were another. The baby, or not baby, entered Mia's mind. She focused on her breathing. Then came General Collins' job offer. She focused on her breathing. The first scratches of the sun were tracing the water. Lady Liberty rose in the distance, droopy torch in her right hand. The whole statue needed repair, though how and when had become a political hot potato. Decades' worth of money allotted for national monuments had gone to the Council of Victors, toward honoring the triumph of Vietnam. No one wanted to be the congressperson who redirected funds from that. A lot of citizens had come to loathe the statue, considering it an eyesore. Mia's father thought it a sentimental leftover. She sort of liked it, the way a person enjoys a musty childhood blanket found in storage. She remembered climbing to the torch on a field trip as a girl, through a staircase of graffiti and rickety metal, seeing the city from an entirely new angle. A snapshot of old American might, sealed in memory. They'd closed the torch after the Palm Sunday attacks, then the entire island. Students like her adolescent cousins wouldn't ever see Empire City as she had. No one could now. The sad, corroding statue was their normal. It was all they knew. In the meantime, Lady Liberty sank slowly into the island it rested on. Turned out, it had been set on sodden ground. Mia adjusted her sports bra and glanced at her watch. A mile in, which meant her warm-up was over. She lengthened out her strides. She turned north along a waterfront path, moving into the bike lane to dodge fallen tree branches and loose rocks. Other than the occasional taxi striking through the pre-dawn and a man in rags watching the city from a bench, she was alone. The wharf across the river jutted out like a broken jawbone, suggesting a past where its docks did more than shuttle around office workers and tourists. The city changed like a photo album, slowly, and then all in a rush. Repair shops became delis. Parking garages became art studios. And the water, a flotilla of Coast Guard barges that had been restored as restaurants and pubs, drifted to and fro. Steel and glass high-rises gave way to the architecture of the last century. Row houses and squatty brick apartments. The streets narrowed, a few dotted by tidy cobblestone. The waterfront path leveled off, though Mia kept her strides long. She knew an incline awaited. She wanted to meet it in force. Sunrise arrived somewhere between miles 3 and 4, stained glass clouds chipping the sky. Mia passed a vomiting young man in a sports jacket too large for him. Probably an intern for one of the banks, she thought, before turning around to make sure it wasn't one of hers. "Call in sick," she shouted. He raised his fist and managed a weak "Defy" before purging again. The motto of the old Radicals caucus in Congress. Funny, Mia thought. Another mile on, Mia ran into a short concrete tunnel. The tunnel lay underneath an abandoned railway line. Sunlight filled it with a fierce yellow shine. Around 10 feet long, the sides and top of it had been covered in graffiti. Dozens and dozens of circles of different colors and sizes. Just about every inch of available concrete had been tagged, leaving a sort of rainbow mosaic. Each of the circles contained 3 arrows pointing down to the left. The job was fresh. Mia could tell by the tint to the spray paint. She came to a stop in the center of the tunnel, her breath sharp but controlled. She rubbed a hand against a small purple circle. It smeared across her palm. I know what this is, Mia thought, looking at her palm, then at the purple circle, sifting through her mind to place where. It took a few seconds, but she remembered a course in modern European history at her college, and the shape in question from the final exam. The anti-fascist sign, she thought, from Nazi Germany. A gust swept through the tunnel, and Mia smelled storm from the night before. She fought off the urge to shiver. It was going to be a cold summer day. Most mornings, Mia turned around and headed home on the same pathway, but the tunnel had spooked her. She pushed east and then south instead, running the sidewalks. The light in the city rose slow, together. A medley of urban noise was beginning to tune, and it sounded mostly like construction din. There was order within the mayhem. One just needed to know the refrains. Mia did. She made it back to her apartment building on time, stopping only to remove her running leg before showering and dressing for work. She was back out her front door 16 minutes later. The air had turned and smelled of humid dew. Mia decided to walk through Vietnam Victory Square. Under the gaze of the 4 Legionnaires sculpture, a couple of kids had waded into the fountain, laughing while splashing water at each other. Across from them, a tour group stood in front of the grand white marble wall with the simple words, "Praise to the victors, in honor of the brave men who went forth to Vietnam, 1955 through 1981. The guide was explaining why the inscription stopped there, despite the insurgency continuing in parts of the north. He was stumbling through the history, and Mia wanted to intervene. Because wars have to end, she thought. Just tell them that. Coffee-charged angst and white-collar id crackled along the streets. Bankers and lawyers and digital communications associates hustling to be at their desks before the workday siren sounded. As she turned onto Wall Street, Mia passed the brownstone, Trinity Church she attended every month or so. She considered herself an atheist since her tour to Albania, but still she appreciated the ceremony of church and the sense of renewal it allowed for. Her family had fled to America in 1620 for that ceremony and for that sense of renewal. She wouldn't give up that heritage for something as banal as not believing. Then there was Jesse. Jesus' heroin needle, he liked calling the Gothic steeple. The church's adjacent cemetery, where a slew of American founding fathers and Union generals from the Civil War rested. A yard of goy bones. And he's all mine, Mia thought. Trinity was an option for their wedding, though her family wanted it held in Connecticut. One more decision that she needed to make, and soon. Mia's bank was located in the Westmoreland Plaza, a mass of skyscrapers bundled together at the end of the island. As she neared it, a vast, bright fire engine came into view, its lights twirling and flashing like a hallucination. A row of police barricades separated the vehicle from the street, uniformed officers turning away confused citizens trying to get to work. Mia joined the crowd. "No one's allowed in the plaza today," a cop was saying, not for the first time. "And yes, that includes you." His eyes lingered on Mia's blouse, and she stared at him flatly until he looked away. Her grandmother had taught her how to do that on her 14th birthday. It worked in Empire City boardrooms just as well as it had in aircraft hangars along the far edges of the world. "Miss Tucker." A man shaped like a square, wearing a rumpled dress shirt and an overlong tie, called to her from a corner of the barricades, close to a large bronze globe. It was the security director of her bank. He looked wired to Mia, even eager. "Miss Tucker," he repeated. "Office is closed today. Your father sent out a message to everyone. Work from home, as you can." Hadn't checked my email yet. This didn't make any sense. The office, as far as Mia knew, had never closed. Finance didn't work from home. That was for other people, other jobs. What's going on? "I shouldn't say," he said, in a tone that suggested he very much wanted to. "Mum's the word," Mia promised. "I'll be finding out anyhow." "A threat," the security director said, his voice low and hushed. "Whole plaza. Homeland Marshals got it last night." Oh. There'd been a few lockdowns in Empire City over the years, for both real and false alarms, but Mia couldn't recall any of them shutting down a main cog of the finance district. Must be some kind of threat. The security director looked out the corner of his eye to make sure no one else was listening, then pulled out his cell phone and read. "With firmness and the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle. Mayday, Mayday. From the ashes, holy redemption." Mean anything to you? Mia shook her head. The first parts from a speech Abe Lincoln gave. Used to be the motto of the old Veterans Administration. The second part, I don't know. The distress signal or something. Mia contemplated that. There's a Council of Victors office down here. Some crazies angry about the rehabilitation colonies again? She tried not to laugh, but couldn't help it. It all needs to be taken seriously, of course. But to shut down the plaza? The security director shrugged. Federals think it means something. That Mayday thing especially. "I see," Mia said, wondering if this was the Bureau's emergency, and if so, why Jesse hadn't said anything to her. He worked intel analysis, not counterterrorism, though he hadn't always been behind a desk. So, hope that gives you all a little tease of the wild, strange world I created in Empire City. And I hope you all enjoyed the occasional giggle from my young son in the nearby room. who is listening in and enjoying this as well. Be well, everybody.